Hello and welcome to this schools webinar for those responsible for governance. I'm Tracey Fielding, Deputy Director for Schools and Early Education, and I'm joined by my colleagues Claire Stewart and Helen Forrest, who are just going to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Stewart. I work alongside Tracey in the Education Directorate and I'm the Deputy Director for Education Improvement and Governance.
And hello everyone, I'm Helen Forrest and I'm a Specialist Advisor in the Schools and Early Education Policy team.
Thank you, Claire and Helen. Claire and I will be presenting today and Helen will be keeping an eye on your questions, so please do continue to share them throughout the session. We've already woven many of the pre-submitted questions into the presentation, and we really appreciate the thought and time that's gone into sending those in to us. We'll also have around 10 minutes at the end to answer as many questions as we can, including any new ones that come in during the webinar. We are recording this webinar and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. We are going to turn off our cameras now so that we can concentrate on the content and to help with your bandwidth. You'll see us again at the end when we get to the questions and answers. So, just a brief outline of what we'll be covering today. We'll begin with an overview of the key changes that have been introduced before moving on to look at evaluation and the toolkits. We'll look at a report card and we'll explain how governance is considered as part of the inspection process. We are pleased to be able to share findings from our early inspections, which offer some valuable insights into how things are working in practice. Again, please do use the questions box to submit any questions so that Helen can respond. And I will now hand over to Claire to go through the changes to our approach to inspection.
Thanks, Tracey. First, let's look at some of our recent changes to how we inspect under our renewed inspection framework. Later in this session, we'll focus on what these changes mean for those responsible for governance in schools. Here's a brief summary of the key changes which we set out to implement in our renewed framework. First and foremost, we're committed to putting children first, breaking barriers down by raising standards, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. We've introduced an inclusion evaluation area, and inspectors evaluate a school's provision for the most vulnerable pupils in its care in every evaluation area. We have improved the way we report the content of inspection findings to parents and carers. This is why we've introduced a new report card, easily accessible, including on mobile devices. The report card sets out our new 5-point grading scale to set high expectations while encouraging improvement where it's needed. We've improved the look and feel of inspection for education providers and professionals with a more collaborative approach. We've added an additional inspector, allowing the lead inspector to spend more time with leaders, including any nominee, as well as overseeing and quality assuring the inspection. We maintain our focus on having care and concern for the well-being and workload of those we inspect. Our inspection methodology has been designed to reduce the workload for the education workforce. The toolkit draws directly on the professional standards, statutory and non-statutory requirements already placed on schools. And if we just look at the bottom row there, we take context into greater account on inspection, giving the time and space for inspectors to work through with leaders to understand each school and its unique challenges and successes. We've enhanced the consistency of our inspections. Almost all school inspections are led by one of His Majesty's inspectors. In addition, we continue to improve our process for allowing leaders to raise any issues about their inspection. We also continue to provide constructive advice to improve based on conversations with leaders. In doing so, we highlight any priorities for improvement, including some that may not already be on leaders' and governors' radars. And if we just move ahead to think about our strengthened approach to inclusion. One of our biggest changes is our focus on inclusion, which now, along with safeguarding, is woven through everything we do. As Sir Martin Oliver has stated, if we get it right for the most vulnerable, we get it right for all. We put children first, breaking down barriers by raising standards, especially for the disadvantaged and vulnerable. This is why we introduced our separate inclusion evaluation area, and inclusion is that key theme across other evaluation areas. We always start with the pupils the government asks providers to focus on, whether through school statutory obligations or non-statutory guidance. That is why we're particularly emphasising those from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds, those with SEND, and those known or previously known to children's social care. We also evaluate how well schools ensure that there is high quality support for all children and learners who may face other barriers to their learning and/or well-being. As part of understanding the barriers most relevant to a school, inspectors make use of demographic data to understand a school's cohort, but crucially, they speak with leaders to understand the context in which the school is working and the particular barriers their pupils face. When we meet with those who have responsibility for governance, we want to understand how you assure yourselves that the school provides well for all pupils, including the most vulnerable. We've committed to ensuring that our inspections look and feel different. From the planning call, we will work collaboratively with leaders to understand the school's context and tailor activities that help us celebrate the school's strengths, validate leaders' priorities and progress, and highlight where improvement is needed. Throughout inspection, our inspectors will demonstrate our core values of professionalism, empathy, courtesy, and respect. And our inspectors have undergone the largest package of training Ofsted has ever offered for an inspection launch to inspectors, alongside webinars like these and events for education professionals. So let's have a think about our evaluation areas and toolkits. You may already be aware of the evaluation areas which make up our toolkit, and you can see those on screen there. Leadership and governance is one of the areas which we will grade. This area will be particularly important to you as governors or trustees, but leadership is also a thread which runs through all of our evaluation areas, and we'll touch on that later in this webinar. So we've introduced toolkits. Our toolkit shows providers and inspectors the evaluation areas that we focus on, and within them the standards we evaluate to inform grading. As we said earlier, the inspection toolkit is based on statutory duties and non-statutory guidance, professional standards, research and inspection evidence. The toolkit is not a checklist. It is used to guide our inspection activity and reflect on the evidence we gather. It supports a shared understanding and discussion of the strengths of the school's work, its context and areas for further exploration. Inspectors apply the toolkit evaluation areas, themes and standards, tailoring activities to each school's context. As we've said, nothing in the standards set out in the toolkits should add to a school's workload, nor do we expect schools to have completed a formal self-evaluation. However, it is helpful for you as governors to be aware of the toolkit and how the school you work with may use it to support continuing improvement. We've designed the toolkit to be clear, accessible and transparent. On the screen, you can see an example of a covering page for the evaluation area, Leadership and Governance. Every evaluation area has a section set out like this, which is designed to help schools and inspectors see at a glance what the evaluation area is about. It sets out the most significant factors that underpin our approaches to evidence gathering and grading. Our Leadership and Governance evaluation area includes the impact of governance. We know that how governors and trustees carry out their functions, including how they support and shape the school's vision, ethos and strategic direction, can have a significant impact on the day-to-day decisions in the school. The covering page for Leadership and Governance evaluation area explains that inspectors will be considering leaders and governors' commitment to raise standards, strategic approach to improvement, assurance that decisions are being taken in the best interests of pupils, and the quality of the professional learning programme for all staff. The toolkit provides more detail about the kinds of evidence inspectors will gather. Each evaluation area details themes, as you will see on the slide, and below that, prompts that guide inspectors' evidence gathering. These are drawn from guidance, research, and inspection evidence about what makes a difference for pupils. On the slide, you can see the evidence gathering themes relating specifically to governance. These evidence gathering themes are not a checklist for schools or governors. They are there to help inspectors think about the right questions, to explore evidence in context, and to make sure that our evaluations are consistent and fair. This provides clarity to ensure that the toolkit makes inspection transparent. Leaders, including governors, can see the themes inspectors will explore and the types of questions that will help shape evidence gathering. In gathering evidence about effective governance, we consider the extent to which governors or trustees are knowledgeable about their statutory duties and carry them out effectively, support and challenge the school's leaders effectively, using the best methods to assure themselves of the quality and impact of different aspects of the school's work, understand their role as the responsible body where applicable in considering and addressing leaders' workload and well-being, assure themselves that leaders have an accurate understanding of the school's context and are prioritising the actions for improvement that will have the greatest impact on pupils. Ensure that systems for monitoring and quality assurance are fair, valid and constructive, and provide leaders and staff with high quality feedback to inform continuous improvement. Hold leaders to account appropriately and effectively for the impact of the school's professional learning programme for staff, and hold leaders to account appropriately and effectively for the school's support and provision for disadvantaged pupils, those with SEND, those who are known or previously known to children's social care. We've been clear throughout the consultation and launch of the renewed framework that schools should not be doing anything just for Ofsted. The toolkit should align with the day-to-day priorities of every school and the work that leaders do that makes a real difference. As such, the evidence gathering prompts and the standards will support yourselves along with school leaders to reflect on and evaluate the strengths of the school's provision and identify precise areas for improvement that will make the biggest difference to pupils. From the planning call onwards, the toolkit gives leaders and inspectors a shared understanding of quality so that they can explore the school's strengths, priorities and progress together. There's no expectation that you use the toolkit, but we are confident that it is a really useful document to support ongoing improvement. We've responded to feedback about the information contained in our IDSR about school context and performance, and this has been updated to make it clear to inspectors, leaders, governors and trustees. These changes have been well received, and so the IDSR should be another useful tool in considering a school's strengths and priorities. If you want to know more about the IDSR and how inspectors consider achievement on inspection, there's a more detailed webinar on this topic that you will find on our YouTube channel, and the QR code on screen will take you straight there. As we come to the next section of the toolkit, we see that each evaluation area is graded on a 5-point scale. This is with the exception of safeguarding, which is met or not met. What you can see here are the grades we expect to see most often on inspection. So that's needs attention, expected standard and strong standard. The expected standard is in the middle. This is the baseline for inspection. It reflects what is required of schools and it is the starting point for all inspections. This is why it's in the centre of the page. We start each inspection with the premise that a school is meeting the expected standard. Importantly, one clear distinction is that we're looking for a secure fit, not a best fit. That is, to meet the expected standard, a school must meet all of the standards in that column. To meet the strong standard, a school will need to meet all the standards in expected and strong. You will, though, see words such as typically and generally in the expected standard. This is to recognise that the expected standard is not about perfection. For example, a school might have a subject area that is being developed well but does not yet quite meet the same standards as others consistently. So if that was the case, the school may still be graded as having a secure fit with the expected standards in the relevant evaluation areas. The needs attention column contains indicators and not standards. An evaluation area is likely to be needs attention when there is not a secure fit for the expected standard. The indicators in this column are designed to exemplify why a school might not be meeting the expected standard. These indicators are deliberately worded positively to acknowledge what leaders are doing, but pointing out where something needs attention as it is not a secure fit with the expected standard. We have said all along that we expect more schools to have varied grade profiles, including potentially areas that need attention. Sir Martin Oliver has often referenced the need for nuanced grading, stating that grades for specific evaluation areas will allow for a more detailed and representative assessment. Individual grading of the evaluation areas will enable parents and carers to be able to see in more detail what's special about your school, what it does well, and what you're working on. As Lee Alston, our National Director, has stated, needs attention is not a fail. It's a bit like if you take your car for an MOT and it passes, but it gets an advisory notice. If you don't pay attention to this could be a problem in the future. In your work with schools, it's important to realise that a mixed profile of grades will be common and it's not a cause for concern. Our inspections, as they always have, will help you to work with school leaders to focus attention where it is needed to ensure the best possible outcomes for all. On the previous slide, we looked at the grades that inspectors will use most often. On this slide, we're focusing on the two ends of the scale that we expect to use much less frequently. So that's urgent improvement and exceptional grades. We have introduced a new exceptional grade. We only award this grade when we see practice which is among the very best nationally and which should be shared with other schools to help them improve. We would really emphasise that a school which meets the strong standard is making a significant difference to all of its pupils. The criteria for an exceptional grade are very exacting. They require clear evidence of a school which has sustained exceptional standards over time and where leaders' actions are having a transformational impact on all pupils, including those who face barriers. As governors or trustees, you will naturally want the very best for your schools, but we would caution against setting the exceptional grade as a benchmark for schools, as this grade will be awarded rarely to identify those schools which others should learn from. Urgent improvement applies when the expected standards have clearly not been met and where there are serious concerns about the school's work and the potential impact of this on pupils. These cases are rare, but the indicators explain what this might look like in practice. Schools who receive a grade of urgent improvement will be in a category of concern. Both urgent improvement and exceptional are important parts of the 5-part scale, but they will be much less common in practice. The majority of evaluations will fall into the middle 3 grades that we looked at earlier. Alongside the toolkit, there are 2 further published documents that support leaders and governors and trustees to know what to expect from inspection. These are the School Inspection Operating Guide for Inspectors and the Inspection Information Document. The operating guide is for inspectors to use, and it details what inspection activities they should cover from the notification call through to the final feedback. So this is also really useful for schools as it details what will happen throughout the course of the inspection. It sets out what inspectors do on inspection, who we engage with and how we feed back to leaders and report our findings. The inspection information document for schools, state-funded schools contains further information for schools about inspection which is not covered in the operating guide for inspectors. The QR code on screen will take you directly to a page that contains both documents. And now we'll turn to our report cards. Our redesigned report card and the 5-point scale offers the clarity and simplicity that parents asked for. This demonstrates our consideration and reflection following the big listen. We also publish data alongside the inspection report card to illustrate the school's context and performance and attendance data over time. So at the end of the inspection, the lead inspector will write a report card which reflects the evidence they gathered, is clear, concise, and focused on what matters most as informed by the school's context, leaders' evaluation of their school and the toolkit, explains the grade given for each evaluation area, makes clear what the school should do to improve, and is consistent with the verbal feedback given to the school at the end of the inspection. The key message here is that the report card really captures the most notable features of the school in a way that is clear and accessible. I'll now hand over to Tracey to consider governance on inspection.
Thank you, Claire. So let's look in more detail at our new approach and what this means for governance. As you can see, governance is featured specifically in a standard corresponding to each grade in leadership and governance. Inspectors use a range of evidence gathering activities throughout the inspection from the preparation stage onwards to consider the impact of leadership and governance on the extent to which pupils firstly achieve, that is academically and personally, the extent to which they belong, and that is that they feel that they belong to and are valued as part of the school community so that they attend, behave and contribute positively to what the school offers, and the extent to which they thrive, benefiting from the right systems, processes and levels of oversight so that they are kept safe and are able to flourish whatever their background or their individual needs. The school's operating guide sets out clearly the expectations for inspectors when engaging with those responsible for governance and with the trust executive. During the preparation and the planning call, inspectors seek as much information and clarity as possible around the structure of leadership. For example, for a school within a trust, inspectors consider the scheme of delegation so that they really understand which decisions are made centrally by trust leaders and which are delegated to the head teacher and/or other school leaders to ensure that they can have the appropriate right discussions with the right leaders. They further will check and clarify their understanding of this during the planning call with school leaders. For federations, they consider how the governing body is structured and recognise that federated schools retain their own URN and are inspected as individual schools. As with trust schools, inspectors establish the school's governance and leadership structure and identify the correct leaders, governors to speak to in the school. If an interim executive board is in place, inspectors establish how its members are taking responsibility for governance. Inspectors will work closely with school leaders to plan the timetable so that they are speaking to the right people about the right things. They co-construct the timetable with leaders and will usually schedule a meeting on governance on the morning of day 2 of the inspection. However, inspectors understand that everyone has very busy calendars and will meet at different times if this is helpful and/or required. These meetings can be face-to-face, over the phone, a video call, or a combination to facilitate as many governors and trustees to attend as possible. In a maintained school, inspectors will meet with the chair of governors or their delegates and other representatives of the governing body. In an academy, they will meet with the chair of the board of the trustees or their delegate and other representatives of the trustees. The operating guide also mentions governance professionals. Where there is a governance professional for the trust board, inspectors may wish to speak to them if it will usually clarify points for inspectors about the governance structure, if it will add to the evidence and/or the trust wish inspectors to speak to a trustee and the governance professional. These meetings should usually take place without the school and trust leaders present. Similar consideration is given to meeting with the CEO. If the CEO is also a trustee, inspectors need to decide whether the meeting with trustees should take place without the CEO being present. When making this decision, they consider the context of the trust, its structure, and the responsibilities trustees hold. In some circumstances, it may be wholly appropriate for the CEO to be present. Fundamental to decisions on who inspectors meet is the structure of the trust or the governing body and the scheme of delegation. Governors or trustees will also be invited to the final feedback meeting in recognition of the crucial role you have in supporting ongoing improvement. This will ensure that you hear the detailed feedback about the inspection and our findings. We are really committed to reviewing the impact of our renewed framework, and as part of this, we have conducted a range of exit interviews with providers about their inspection experiences, as well as our own analysis of inspection findings, including through our robust moderation and our quality assurance processes. In the remainder of this session, we're just going to share some of that feedback we have had so far about our renewed approach. Our toolkit and our inspector training ensures that inspectors take context into account when evaluating schools. This is important. We are pleased that since the start of inspections under the renewed framework in November, schools with above average proportions of disadvantaged pupils have received the full range of grades. We have graded many schools that have above and well above proportions of disadvantaged pupils as being at the expected or strong standard for achievement. Inspectors are really taking time to understand the school's context and consider the progress from starting points and pupils' knowledge and skills across the curriculum to understand achievement in the round. Achievement is about more than just qualifications. Our achievement evaluation area focuses on whether pupils gain the knowledge, skills and qualifications they need to succeed in life. It also recognises the importance of pupils' progress from their starting points. Inclusive schools set high standards for all pupils, and we, like school leaders, aspire to the best possible outcomes for all pupils. Pupils' performance in national tests and examinations and how this compares to national averages is just one part of the picture of achievement in a school. Inspectors use a range of data, including national averages for disadvantaged pupils, to understand achievement better. Inspectors use all published data carefully and are aware of its limitations, including context where this published data does not tell the full story of pupils' performance. Inspectors always discuss each school's unique context in detail with school leaders and take this into account when considering the achievement of pupils. Importantly, our evaluation of achievement always draws upon published data and the evidence gathered on site of how well pupils achieve. Part of taking context into account is really understanding the pupils who make up the school community and the progress they are making from their starting points. Inspectors and leaders are seeing the benefit of the case sampling methodology in really getting to understand both the context of the school and the differences the school is making to the outcomes of its most vulnerable pupils. Case sampling really helps us to understand starting points and the outcomes and the experiences of individual pupils, and also to understand the quality of provision through this lens so that we can really understand the difference that the school is making, particularly for the most vulnerable pupils. We are really pleased that our renewed framework is allowing us to capture the nuanced reality of individual schools. Under the renewed framework, it is common for schools to receive a more mixed profile of grades, which truly reflects the strengths and areas for development of individual schools. And the combination of this nuance and the clarity of this toolkit and our next steps will support schools to continue to improve to ensure the best outcomes and experiences for all of their pupils. The renewed framework creates more space for professional dialogue and working closely with school leaders. Senior leaders now have the opportunity to walk their school with inspectors right from the start of the inspection, and feedback suggests that this is really valued by leaders. Similarly, our approach to reflection meetings and our commitment to an open and transparent dialogue about emerging findings throughout the inspection is really helping leaders to feel involved and informed in every part of the process of the inspection. Linked to this, there are a number of ways that inspectors are trained and supported to consider and keep leaders' well-being in mind throughout the inspection. We absolutely recognise that inspections are demanding events in a school's calendar and that leaders are managing an inspection and continuing with the daily running of their school. Yourselves as governors and trustees play a role here in supporting leaders and ensuring that the head teacher knows who is responsible for their well-being on a day-to-day basis. Usually the local authority or the trust as the lead inspector will ask for this information during the planning call. The lead inspector will also make sure leaders are aware that support for their own and their staff's well-being is available through the charity Education Support. Inspectors ask if any reasonable adjustments or adaptations are required during the planning call and ongoing within the inspection, and will always try to accommodate these where possible. Since the launch of the renewed framework, lead inspectors notify Ofsted's National Duty Desk of any reasonable adjustments or adaptations requested and considered. This does reassure school leaders that requests and discussions are taken seriously, and the information is used to agree a plan with the individual and leaders as appropriate. Feedback from our early inspections indicates that this is making a real and positive difference to many leaders. We are hearing a great deal about the tone of inspections now being more positive. Inspections that seek to understand what you offer, not to catch you out. Professional conversations conducted with mutual respect. We are hearing of a more collaborative approach and a process involving inspectors who are flexible, open to discussion, and respectful of the challenges that schools face. There is now more space for genuine dialogue and transparent conversations throughout the inspection about the emerging findings as the inspection progresses. I will now hand over to Claire to summarise the session before the opportunity for questions.
So in summary, leadership, like inclusion, runs through all evaluation areas, as we know that effective leadership, including governance, is essential to the successful work of schools. We've spoken today about the evidence gathering prompts in the toolkit which guide inspectors. Our leadership and governance evaluation area specifically considers the extent to which governors are knowledgeable about their duties and roles, as well as the extent to which they support, challenge, and hold leaders to account. Ultimately, we want to understand how those responsible for governance collectively ensure that the school's provision enables every pupil to thrive, and the commitment to raising standards of education and care to improve the lives of all pupils, especially those who are disadvantaged, those with SEND, and those who are known or previously known to children's social care, and those who may face other barriers to their learning and/or well-being. Our inspections look and feel different. Professional dialogue is central to our approach. That includes professional dialogue with those responsible for governance. Inspectors meet with those responsible for governance, including the chair or equivalent. And of course, governors will be welcome to attend the final feedback at the end of the inspection, in which inspectors will set out the inspection findings, including celebrating what the school does well, validating leaders' priorities, and highlighting where there may be more to do. We hope today's session has been helpful, and we would strongly encourage participants to have a look at our school's inspection toolkit online, which will support further understanding. So before we move on to questions that you may have, thank you for the work that you do to ensure that your schools support pupils to achieve, belong, and thrive. Okay, so we'll switch our cameras back on again so that we can answer your questions.
I think there are some questions there, but most have been answered. Just to confirm, the link to the slides, it will be on our YouTube channel. I think you've answered there, Helen.
Yeah, so I've been answering questions as people have been going along. So there's a new question now. Would governors be asked about school data and/or statistics about the school?
So yes, I can go with that one. So what happens with governors? They will probably be seen on day 2, as we've said during the presentation, and very often they will be asked about any aspects that have come up during the inspection. That can involve data and that sort of information, but it's really sort of testing out how governors know that and holding leaders to account. It's really, there are more questions around that than there is about particular data. So they don't usually have a data conversation with governors. It's more about, what do you really know about the school and the improvements that leaders are making? How do you know that that's really happening, and how you're holding them to account for all of those aspects, such as the vulnerable pupils that we talked about in the presentation. But you wouldn't have a specific data meeting with governors, but obviously data is something that governors will look at, and they can refer to that in the responses, but the expectations are not there for governors to be able to reel off lots of data and explain it.
Okay, there's another question. It was about case sampling, and that question is what kind of criteria are used to select those children? That's clearly outlined in the operating guide, and we select 6 pupils to case sample, and that's not to base a grade on those 6 pupils, but it gives us a window into their experiences and a window into how well the school meets the needs of those pupils, that then allows us to perhaps explore further with other children whether that is something that is typical. So in the operating guide, it outlines that we will select a pupil that has an EHC plan. We'll select a pupil, if there are looked after pupils within the school, we'd select a pupil that is looked after. If there are young carers within the school, that's another criteria that we consider for selecting a pupil. And a pupil premium, any pupils in receipt of pupil premium, we would select a pupil there. But we also then ask leaders on the call about their own context, and we ask them, what are the vulnerable groups within your school? Because every school is different, and there are groups that are vulnerable in different schools, and leaders are usually very good at identifying that, and we would select a pupil for case sampling from the vulnerable group that leaders have actually identified themselves. And then what we do is we go through their experiences, look at what their provision is like, what support they've had, how the school works with other agencies, if that is applicable to that pupil, but also their parents, and what that experience is for that pupil, and how well their needs are being met.
There's a question there about the few reports about mentioning governance in as much detail as previously. It asks if it's common or if it's perhaps the context of those reports. I would say it's probably the context of the reports, remembering that there is word limitation to the evaluation area and the report card writing. So they do talk about leaders, but in leaders and governance, they do include governance in much of that. But it does depend on the context in which they're writing and their evidence base, I would say. So that is variable.
Just spotted one in there about from someone saying they're a new parent governor, having only been in post for 3 months, and I suppose what sort of level of knowledge we would expect. So I guess to reassure, it's not a test. You know, if you're inspected in the next couple of months, inspectors aren't, you know, they're not kind of coming in and expecting you to absolutely know every single thing, but it's about how you sort of support and challenge your school and how you sort of understand your duties. And I guess, you know, if you're a relatively new governor, how you've taken to that, you might have a slightly different perspective, but how you're actually holding leaders to account and sort of engaging with that governor process.
I can see a question in there about whether governors are expected to have hard evidence in response to the questions that inspectors ask. We're not testing governors when we talk to them, and what we do ask for access to is governor minutes. So within those governor minutes, we have a lot of evidence of the roles of governance. So we're not expecting you to, within that meeting, literally produce a folder full of evidence for us, but we would look at governors' minutes to see how governors engage with leaders and what information they get.
There's another question there about inspection fitting with the schools within the RISE programme. So RISE is a DFE programme, not an Ofsted as an inspectorate. DFE as the regulator will be leading on the RISE programmes. Occasionally we have come across inspections of our schools where there are RISE advisors who have been in, but what we are doing is we have protocols in place for Ofsted's role and the DFE's role, which is very separate. So we don't get involved with the RISE programmes, and that clarity is specified by the lead when they are out there on the inspection.
Just spotted one in there about as a specific safeguarding governor, what key aspects of strategic oversight. I think exactly that, like it would be great for you to kind of talk through what are the things that you do as part of your role to keep that strategic oversight. And you've said there about demonstrating that you actively monitor and challenge the school's safeguarding culture and practice. That's exactly what inspectors would want to hear from you. So how do you go about doing that? What sort of activities do you do? How do you engage with the school? And sort of have a discussion around that, really.
There's another one about finances. We don't get involved with the finances with governance. It is about the leadership within the school, so we won't get involved with finance and budgets as part of leadership and governance. We obviously, some discussion does happen where governors and trustees do share that with us, but it doesn't impact upon, if you look at the standards in the evaluation areas, it doesn't impact upon the grading if governors choose to talk about that, but we're very clear about our role as an inspectorate of standards. We're just working through the questions.
There's a couple of questions on there. I don't know if Helen or Tracey want to come in on these, but they're sort of related. So there's one that sort of asks about if we're meeting governors on day 2, what's typically happened on day 1 before meeting. And then there's another one that is related, because it says if governance is a day 2 session in respect of any concerns seen on day 1, will governors have advanced knowledge of that? So I suppose it might be useful just to get into a bit more about you know, how we kind of build up to that meeting with governors.
Throughout the inspection, we're having regular reflection meetings with leaders. So we would alert the leadership of the school if there were any concerns arising. Depending on what those concerns were, it might be that we got in contact with governance directly. For example, if we were concerned about the welfare of leaders and the governance were named as the person that was responsible for their well-being, we might make a call there. But in terms of concerns about things that are happening in school, leaders often are sharing that information with governors, but it would be discussed, and we usually meet with governors at the start of day 2, and we would share with them the reflections and the information that we'd gathered so far there. So hopefully that answers that.
And I think the other thing to add there as well, Helen, is that it doesn't have to be on day 2. We do say to day 2 because we want time to get used to and get to know your school, so that when we're asking questions of governance, we actually have an idea about their school that we're asking questions about. And I think that's why we usually do day 2, but we can do that in day 1. It's just that sometimes doing it on day 2, you have a bit of an idea about the school yourself after having been in there for a day. So it just gives a little bit a better dimension to some of those questions that you can ask governance on day 2.
And I know actually, Tracey, from when we've done one of these sessions before, you've talked about inspections where that's been quite flexible as well, hasn't it? You know, because we know that a lot of governors, you know, obviously it's voluntary, it's something that you're doing in your free time, and obviously inspections are during the working day. I know there's been adaptations to make sure that people can meet if they want to.
I can see a question there on the effective use of pupil premium in relation to school budget. So in terms of pupil premium, we look specifically at what the pupil premium strategy is, what leaders have prioritised within that strategy, and the impact of that. So we look very specifically at the impact of leaders' actions in relation to the pupil premium. Obviously, you do put on your pupil premium strategy what you've spent on different aspects of pupil premium, but we're really looking at the impact of the actions that have been taken. And so if the impact of the actions aren't effective, that would come out within our inclusion evaluation area.
There's a question there that's just come in about whether we speak to governors individually or collectively. So it tends to be a meeting for governors who can attend. So it would be a sort of group generally. But of course, if there was only one who could make it, then it'd be individual.
Yeah, and following on from that, I think some governors do want to speak to inspectors individually, and we welcome anyone who wants to speak to us. Same with parents. If parents ask to speak to us, we will try our best to try to fit that into the 2-day inspection, or give them a call afterwards, remembering that the inspection doesn't technically finish until the report is published. So we will sort of follow up on any of those calls just to make sure that everybody's had their request for us to speak to them carried out. There's a couple of questions there about expectations. New foundational governor will be expecting his role of a priest who is attached to the school. Similarly, similar expectations as there would as a governor of that school, having that discussion, similar sorts of discussions about how leaders are held to account, what the school is like, exactly the same expectations, no real differences in terms of that. Just working through, there's quite a few questions.
Question there, yeah, I was just trying to spot ones that we haven't answered. There's one there around case sampling again, and whether we look at high achieving children in case sampling to ensure they're getting appropriate reach and stretch.
That could be looked at certainly, particularly if they were pupil premium, but we look at all abilities whenever we're doing our learning walks throughout the inspection. And we'd always be interested when we're in lessons about how those pupils that are high achieving are being appropriately challenged.
Just answering a question in the chat bar about the governance professional, what I would say there is we will speak to anybody who leaders would want us to talk to. We wouldn't refuse to talk to anybody. So just that comment about the in maintained schools, if leaders ask us to speak to anyone, we would do that. And of course, leaders, because we're talking about having that dialogue during our 2-day inspection, what we do is we say, is there anybody that you would like us to speak to? So if there is a governance structure and there are particular people who would want to speak to us, we will of course fit those into the timetable as leaders would want us to, or governance would want us to. So we wouldn't refuse.
There's a question here about whether inspections take place with governors and trustees together. That can happen, but they usually have different areas of responsibility, and it depends on the areas of responsibility, because part of the trustee's role might be how they gather information from the governing body and how that feeds through. So it would depend on how that was structured.
It's one about the number and upper limit as to how many governors should attend their governance session. I know I've sat in a room with lots and lots of governors, full governing body, and that's absolutely great because they hear the message firsthand from us. So as many as possible is what I would always encourage, because it's so good for governors to hear it firsthand and have the opportunity to ask any questions about anything that we're talking about from the inspection, because they haven't been there for the 2 days. So no upper limit at all, and would encourage as many as is possible to be involved.
Question about
timing.
Are schools generally inspected 4 years from the term which they were last inspected? Depends on gradings, doesn't it?
Yes, it does depend on the gradings, and obviously we had COVID where there was a lot of differences in the timescales. Then we've moved through EAF into the renewed framework. If any governors have any questions about the timing, because there are some differentials to consider there, then I would encourage leaders to just email into us and ask us specifically about their situation and context. We are often answering calls about the timings, but equally we have, I believe, got a blog out there about timings and what that looks like. So if you go onto our website, that information is there that just lets you know those timings and what type of school, etc., because there's so many variances in the structures.
There's a question that's just popped in there about greater emphasis on how vulnerable students are taught, and just sort of asking whether, you know, we also look at those who are expected levels or greater depth. And as Helen said, we absolutely do on inspection, you know, through all of the activities. So we case sample and particularly follow those pupils, but we also throughout the inspection will see lots of other examples of work in books and lessons and talking to staff. So we absolutely do focus on those working at expected and greater depth. But you know, we quoted Martin, Sir Martin Oliver, our Chief Inspector, a couple of times, and he repeatedly says, if you get it right for the most vulnerable pupils, you get it right for everybody. And that's why we've woven that throughout our new inspection framework, because if schools are doing a really, really good job for those pupils with the highest barriers to their learning or well-being, they're not going to be then getting it wrong for those who are working at the expected standard. So it's about, you know, yes, we have that focus on those vulnerable learners, but not at the kind of expense of any other learners. It's about taking that sort of holistic approach on inspection, but case sampling to make sure we follow through the inclusion evaluation area.
One about the timescales there, expecting for the school, following the school element of inspection for reporting. That will depend on the grades, but normally it's sort of 18 days for the FAC, which is the factual accuracy check, and then it goes back, but it's within 30 days, I think was the last timing.
Yeah, working days, I think, isn't it? Just having a look at new ones. Just a question there, whether we'd expect to see clear evidence on the extent or depth of governor training. Don't know if one of you want to.
We certainly ask about governor training, particularly in relation to safeguarding, and it's how well governors understand their statutory responsibilities and how well they are strategically having oversight of the school. So that comes through training. We don't necessarily ask for, can I have a record of your training and then check it off, but if governance don't have a clear oversight of what's happening in the school, then that's where it would come through in that meeting. So it's not about necessarily ticking off training, but actually is the training having the impact that governors need in terms of being able to hold leaders to account and being that support and challenge for leaders.
There's one about, okay, for a governor who is an inspector to attend the meeting. If you're a governor, you're entitled to attend, whether you're an inspector or not. So yes, you can attend the meetings. When we are speaking about governance, assume quite a bit of the responsibility to answer these questions lies with the trust, depending on the scheme of delegation. Again, it depends on the makeup of the governance, and I think I talked about the right people. So leaders will determine who the right people are to talk to the inspectors, and that will be determined by those discussions from the planning call all the way through the 2 days as to who would be best to talk to. If it's the trust, then the leaders will hopefully defer us to the trust to talk to them.
Just scrolling through, I can't spot any that we haven't answered, but I'm
there's one about the timescales. Can we expect following the in-school element of inspections for reporting?
Oh, I think Tracey did that one.
Oh, did you? Sorry.
Got that one.
You could do it twice though. It's a good one. Another one popped in,
isn't it? A new one's popped in.
There's just one there about what proportion of elements have been graded as exceptional so far. I certainly don't have those figures to hand.
We don't have the figures to hand at the moment, but it's a very small proportion at the moment. Originally, I think you'll know we had volunteer schools for our first 3 weeks, and there were a couple of examples of that, but there are a lot of expected strong in terms of the grading.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that we will at some point communicate what that looks like as we go through the process with these. We're being very transparent about our findings on these inspections because we're really interested in the views of leaders as we go through this process with a renewed framework.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, as I sort of said on the bit that I was explaining about the toolkit, that exceptional grade, you know, it's exceptional. That's why it's called exceptional, because it will be by exception. And that's not to say we don't, you know, we don't have quotas, we don't have, it's about inspectors going out there and looking at that practice, and when they see exceptional practice, that grade will be awarded. But it really is something that stands apart, you know, that really is amazing. So by its very nature, it will be rarer, and as I said earlier, it's the same at both ends of the scale. That's why we've got that kind of the 3 most common grades where we expect most schools will fall, and actually it is very common. It will be very common for schools to have, you know, some expected, some strong, some attention needed, and it's just about sort of highlighting those, you know, validating the priorities and spotting the strengths and highlighting the areas for development, and then you've got those are the 2 grades that are kind of less common.
There's a question about parent view survey. So I know that the parent view survey was changed for the renewed framework. and I know that there was a trial period, and we liaised with several groups to come up with the questions for the parent view. So it was changed for the new framework.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you, Andy.
Got the stats. So there's just something coming on exceptional grades. In terms of sort of educating the public, we have done various blogs and webinars, and there's quite a lot on our YouTube channel as well, explaining the grades. We've also done some pieces for specifically kind of for parents and carers to sort of explain those new grades. We're very clear that there isn't a read across to the previous framework, so it's not about comparing to, you know, to previous grades. And we're sort of putting that information out there for people to engage in and to understand that actually that expected standard represents a high bar. That is what schools are required in statutory guidance and sort of professional expectations to do. And by meeting that expected standard, it is a high bar. And then obviously strong is even higher on top of that. So we've sort of put a lot of information out there that you can have a look at on our website through various blogs and like I said, on our YouTube channel as well. I think we've maybe got time for one more, so we'll see if there's one more in there. So there's one there just about writing, assuming that the renewed framework from November 2012 has replaced the 2019 framework, not just with the grading system, but also areas on inspection. So yes, if you look in our toolkits, obviously we've got a number of evaluation areas now. So obviously we've talked a lot today about the leadership and governance evaluation area, but there's also lots of other ones in there, like achievement, attendance and behaviour. There's obviously the safeguarding one. So what we've done is launch that whole new framework, and yeah, you're absolutely right, it does replace the previous education inspection framework. I think we're possibly out of time now. So thank you so much everyone for joining us today. Hopefully this has been useful for you. It's been great to have your engagement and your questions and to have the opportunity to share a bit more information with you. As we said throughout, this is recorded. It will go up on our YouTube channel. So I know there's a couple of people in the chat that have sort of missed part of it, but you will be able to go back and refer to it as needed. But thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.